Hello, Daylight Church Online. I'm H.L. Hussman. I'm the lead pastor here at Daylight, and we just want to say thanks for tuning into our broadcast and being a part of our online community. We've been brainstorming ways that we can effectively and efficiently connect more with people in remote locations that are watching us online, and I have a few opportunities I'd like you to know about. Number one, if you would introduce yourself, we would love to know you. You can email online@daylightchurch.com. That's online@daylightchurch.com. Just tell us who you are, where you're watching from, how you found out about us, and any other relevant information that you wanted to share. We would love that opportunity. Secondly, we have a website, mydaylightchurch.com, and on that website is a tab that says Join the Daylight Crew. There's things that you can do off-site that would benefit us and allow you to engage more with the community. You can join our prayer team and our prayer ministry. You can join our study team and our service team. You can join our small groups, and we're happy to Zoom you in. There's all kinds of opportunities on that tab, and we would appreciate if you would fill it out and make yourself known to us. If you believe that Daylight is kind of your home away from home and you don't have a faith community of your own, and you would like to support and be a part of this financially, you can do so at daylightchurch.com/giving or by texting the number 84321 and completing a short form and selecting Daylight Church as the place you're going to give. If there's any way we can serve you, we would love the opportunity, and you can always reach us at online@daylightchurch.com. Thanks, and enjoy the service. Good morning, Daylighters. It's good to be back with you. As most of you know, my family and I ran through a bout of COVID over the last couple of weeks, and the first week was pretty rough, and the second week has been pretty tired, but I'm feeling 100% now. I'm barely, just a little short of breath if I climb stairs or something like that, but other than that, feeling pretty great, and I really appreciate those of you that reached out and those of you that provided meals for us, and appreciate the online community. I don't know if you guys know this. Most of you know this at this point, but we have an online church going on, and they meet every other Sunday night, and they provided a meal for us while we were sick, and so thanks, online community, for that, and just thankful to be back. We're tackling the MOAS, the mother of all sermons, which is the Sermon on the Mount, and we've been doing it on again, off again for quite some time, and we're actually on part 18 today, and we're just about just over one third of the way through the sermon. But this movie clip, for those of you watching online that didn't get to see it, is from the movie The Help, and one of the housemaids is requesting a loan from her employer, and the woman is named Hilly. The redheaded white woman is named Hilly, and Hilly is a deplorable human being. She's just despicable throughout the movie. And how many of you have seen The Help and know about Hilly? Hilly is just disgusting. And it reminds me of a shirt I have that says, "Sometimes people just need a high five in the face." What is it that makes her so deplorable? Shout it out. What is it about her that's she's self-righteous? Anything else? And selfish, yep. Condescending. She does like pies. If you know the story, she gets hers, and it has to do with a pie, but we won't ruin that for you. Anything else? She's pretty racist. Wouldn't you say she's deeply, disgustingly racist? Wouldn't you say that she's pretty high-minded? I mean, she thinks really highly of herself and really lowly of other people. And then, to me, part of the worst part about Hilly is, as you saw in the clip, she says, "Now, as a Christian," just when she says that, that high five in the face, that spirit of slap, I've heard it said, just wants to come over me, where it's just, Hilly, she's just everything wrong with what it could be to be a Christian. Judgmental, and seeing herself as righteous and holy and the purveyor of truth, whereas other people are deserving of less. And even in this situation, she says, God doesn't help those who are capable of helping themselves. And this is a situation where the woman is probably not capable of helping herself more than she could. So she has no mercy. That to me is the hardest part about the character of Hilly, is there's zero mercy in this person. And we're going to be jumping into a little bit more of Matthew chapter 6 as we go on. And I think what Jesus wants to do in the Sermon on the Mount, the mother of all sermons, is he kind of wants to confront our own inner Hilly. He wants us to look at ourselves and say, obviously he's not referring to the movie The Help, but it's that mentality of examining yourself and finding out like who you are at your inside. And And last week we talked about this passage at the beginning. It says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. When you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward." And last week we talked about how when it comes to this topic, there's two ways to fall off the horse. One way is to just not do good stuff, not be charitable, not to give, not to fast, not to pray, all these things that Jesus is about to confront in the Sermon on the Mount. Some people don't give a rip about these things, and that's one way to fall off the horse. But the other way is to do the stuff, to do the right activities, to fast and pray and give, and these things that Jesus talks about. But to do it with this heart and motive that says, I am something special. I want to be seen doing these things. I want to display my righteousness in front of other people so that they will think highly of me. And I would say that probably is where Hilly's at, is when she does, she wants to be seen, she wants to be known, she wants to be lifted up in the esteem of other people, and Jesus confronts both. And so we talked about how if you have reality, you don't need virtual reality, and if you're doing, so this picture we talked about specifically, a dude out in the woods with virtual glasses on in his pitiful adventuring gear, like if you're doing the virtual reality, why do you need to be in the woods in the gear? And if you're in the woods with the gear, why do you need the virtual reality? And so we talked about how Jesus seems to indicate that we should do the stuff, but we should do the stuff out of pure motive and clear heart. And so we talked a lot about pure motive and clear heart and sincerity last time. And today we're going to start talking about the stuff. Like the thing. So when we look at Hilly, the reason it bugs us so much when she says, now as a Christian, is because she doesn't behave like a Christian at all, which implies that there is a way that Christians ought to behave. But then you start using the word ought, and all of a sudden it turns into rules. It turns into actions and laws and things that we think will make us a good Christian. And that's not what we're talking about here either. We're talking about the reality that when Christ invades a heart, it shapes you, it changes you, it transforms you, and the stuff naturally follows. So you don't do the stuff to gain the heart. You have the heart, so the stuff naturally follows. So when Jesus says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people, he warns you not to do it in order to be seen by them. But then he says, when you give to the needy, then he says, when you fast and when you pray are the things that we're going to talk about in the coming weeks. So what is implied here when it says when you give to the needy? That it's going to happen, right? This is foundational to his teaching on a pure heart and a pure motive, is that you're going to do this stuff because followers of Jesus and people sold out to God and people that God has invaded their life and changed them, they're people who have discipline. They're people who pursue the disciplines of fasting, who pray out of a sincere relationship with God, and who give to the needy. And so there's instruction baked into it as far as the action is concerned. Now, when it comes to fasting, when it comes to prayer, which are topics that Jesus is going to address in just a moment in the Sermon on the Mount, and just seconds later, those are disciplines that help you grow as a Christian and help you connect with God better. But this thing about giving to the needy, so as you read Scripture, you're going to find that fasting and prayer are fairly periodic occurrences. You're going to see much about fasting and prayer, but it's kind of genteel in its pushing of it. It's kind of, this is something you need to do. This giving to the needy thing, Scripture tackles differently. It almost makes it out to the point where there's this dividing line between those who are sincere, those who are legit, and those who are not. And you see it in the parables of Jesus, and you see it in his commentary in the Sermon on the Mount. And so there's some harshness to us. It's almost like, Hilly, if you won't give a loan to this person who has served you so diligently, who's in dire straits, how could you even say such a thing as a Christian? You shouldn't even wear the label if you don't get this one truth. And that's kind of how Scripture presents this teaching on giving to the needy. There's a great book that I recommend. It's an older book. It's called Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger. It's by Ron Sider. And in that book, he says this. He says, God's word, by which he means the Bible, God's word teaches a very hard, disturbing truth. Those who neglect the poor and the oppressed are really not God's people at all. Now, I tend to try to be pretty careful about any kind of dividing lines like that, of any kind of judgment as far as, well, you're not a real Christian. There's been so much abuse that's occurred over the phrase, you're not a real Christian, or that kind of mentality. But I think Scripture on this particular point says something is seriously messed up if you don't get this part right. There's a vacuum in your heart that needs to be filled if you can't get this charity thing right. And so Ron Sider's onto something here, even though I probably would have expressed it differently. He says, no matter how frequently they practice their religious rituals, nor how orthodox their creeds and confessions. In other words, you can stand up in church and you can recite the Lord's Prayer and the confessions and the Apostles' Creed, and you can believe all the right stuff, but if you're not charitable to the poor, can you really call yourself a follower of Jesus? Can you really call yourself a God-fearing, God-loving, in reverence toward God type person? And you don't have to look much further than the Proverbs. The Proverbs just hammer this point. I'm going to share 10 or 12 of them with you real quick, and they're 10 of 12 of 100. I mean, if you read the book of Proverbs, which is just the wisdom of God, you're going to see this topic over and over. The generous man will be prosperous, and he who waters will himself be watered. He who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, but he who is gracious to the needy honors him. He who mocks the poor reproaches his maker. Who rejoices at calamity will not go unpunished. He who is gracious to a poor man lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his good deed. And I know it's not the best public speaking presentation to just recite passage after passage and read passage after passage, but this is what happens when you read the Proverbs, is you're going to see it over and over to the point of tedium, to the point of redundancy, is this idea that followers of God, people who have the wisdom of God, are generous to the poor, are generous to the needy. They notice people who are hurting and they do something about it. Proverbs continues, he who shuts his eye to the cry of the poor will also cry himself and not be answered. He who is generous will be blessed, for he gives some of his food to the poor. He who gives to the poor will never want, but he who shuts his eyes will have many curses. He who despises his neighbor sins, but happy is he who is gracious to the poor. And do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. And again, I'm telling you, this is a small sampling of what Proverbs has to say about giving to the poor. And Proverbs isn't the only passage about charity in all of Scripture. It's replete with passages about charity. In other words, when Christ embraces you, there's something natural that occurs in you that wants to embrace others. When you see your own need and you see that God has responded to that need, that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that God loved and he gave. And when that embraces your heart and it captures your attention, people who are hurting capture your attention. It's something that naturally that follows. There's not a lot of passages in Scripture that talk about the clear delineation between heaven and hell, or paradise and Hades, or whatever your view is on the afterlife. There's not very many passages that say, these made it, these didn't make it. But I can think of a couple that are pretty straightforward, pretty out there as far as this is what Judgment Day will look like. And oddly enough, they both very much have to do with how a person treated the needy, how a person treated the poor. There's a parable that Jesus tells about a rich man and a beggar named Lazarus, and it says that there was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. So we go back to the Proverbs. It says, do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. And so the gate would be either the gate to your home or the gate to the city. And so odds are in your suburb that most of us live in Louisville, there's probably not people doing what they call flying signs, people holding pieces of cardboard that say will work for food. There's a few, there's some professionals in town that's what they do, but there's a few at certain crossroads in the city. But odds are the more you go towards downtown and towards urban areas, you're gonna see more of that, more impoverished, more needy people, more people living in tents, more people living outside of tents. And so when it talks about the gate, that's what it's talking about, is the gate to the city, the meeting place, the marketplace, the place where you go to interact with others, the communal place. And it talks about crushing the afflicted at the gate. And we go back to this rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. And at his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. This is the setup to Jesus' parable. There's a rich dude that has everything, and there's this poor guy that lives outside of his gate that has nothing and suffers. And that's kind of all we know about them. There's not a whole lot more that Jesus gives us details about concerning these two people. But for the rest of the parable, it says, Lazarus was at Abraham's bosom, which is considered paradise, and the rich man was in torment in Gehenna, which is often translated as hell. So the setup is there's this very, very rich person that drives past this very, very poor person every day, and the rich person ended up in hell, and the poor person ended up in heaven, sort of. And that's kind of the only standard. And then what we find out is that the rich person is begging for just a cold drop of water on his tongue. And when it comes to eternal conscious torment, this is one of the passages that has to be dealt with. But you'll notice when it says when it delineates who goes where, the one hint it gives us is charity. The one hint about eternal destination has everything to do with who noticed who and who helped who. And then you get into the parable of the sheep and the goats, which is very much the same thing. Jesus says at the end of time, I will sit on my throne, and there will be people separated into the sheep, and there will be people separated into the goats. And to the goats I will say to you, you ignored me. When I was in prison, you didn't visit me. When I was without clothing, you didn't clothe me. When I was without food, you didn't give me something to eat. When I suffered, you didn't seem to notice, or you couldn't be bothered. And then those people are taken into what is called outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, is how it's described. But then it describes the sheep, and it says, when I was naked, you gave me clothing. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you came and visited me. When I suffered, you comforted me. And both camps say, when did we do this to you? And he says, as much as you did it to the least of these, you did it unto me. And then he says to those on the right, the sheep, the ones who fed the hungry and clothed the naked, he says, well done, enter into my rest, come in. And so these, like I said, there's not very many passages that say heaven and hell. There really are not that very many of them at all. But two of the very major ones that we have everything to do with noticing and serving people who are suffering. So when Jesus says, when you give to the needy, don't announce it, don't make a huge deal about it, he's teaching on heart and sincerity, but he's also just saying, naturally, of course you will. Because when God gets a hold of a heart, that heart notices the suffering, and you can't get around it. So what was it? I think about, those are the passages that can keep me up at night. Like when I think about what kind of church we are, or what kind of pastor I am, or what kind of human being I am, or what kind of husband and father I am, that's the stuff that can really rattle me. And it's stuff that we need to think about. But what stands in the way? What are the things that we think or the things ingrained in our lives that keep us from helping? So when we see somebody that's holding a sign, will work for food, some of us will stop and help. Some of us will hold money out the window. Some of us will offer food. Some of us will say, hey, I've got a job you can do. But what is the stuff that makes us drive past? And I mean that literally and figuratively, because it's not just the guy flying the sign on the street corner. It's all the people. It's the single moms out there that are hurting. It's the refugees that are coming into our city. It's the people who are imprisoned, rightly or wrongly. And let's face it, we have plenty of time to binge watch Netflix and eat good food. We have plenty of time to be the rich person arrayed in purple, the sign of royalty. What holds us back? What are the barriers? Shout some stuff out. Convenience? Fear? What do you mean by fear? Think about it. Convenience. Yeah, there's a vulnerability to helping, to stepping out. Anything else? What's that? Fraud? What do you mean? Okay, so there's this concern that they may not be legitimately in need, and then there's the kind of an enabling thing that comes with that, right? And it's like a bad steward of money if you help somebody who doesn't actually need help. So that's definitely something we think about. Anything else? Selfishness, right? Self-centered. We just drive past because we are who we are and we do what we do. Anything else? which is? Right. So the converse of that would be that we're not embracing that. So the reason we don't help is because we don't consider others more important than ourselves, which ties into just kind of being selfishness. This is the list. It's a fairly predictable list. I think if you asked a bunch of people why you didn't help, that's the stuff you'll hear about. This is the list I came up with: is a lack of love, apathy, fear of enabling, love of comfort, and feeling overwhelmed. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I can think, well, I can't help everybody, so I tend to do nothing. And so there's all these reasons that we don't. When it comes to enabling, for example, was that you, Allison, that said fraud? I've seen a couple situations recently. Well, one situation recently and one situation in my past. I was in Washington, D.C. one time, and there was this guy flying a sign, and I walked up to him and started a conversation. He said, man, I haven't eaten in 3 days. And there was a hot dog stand nearby. I said, well, let's get you some hot dogs. He said, man, I'm sick of hot dogs. And that's kind of how it can go sometimes with professionals or with fraud people, is they'll say, I haven't eaten in 3 days, but then when you get down to it, that's just not the truth. And let's face it, he wanted money for booze, is probably the truth. And even if it's not the truth, that's what I think. So I don't want to help him because I don't want to enable him, right? Just recently, we were feeding downtown, and there was a guy, and it was cold. It was in the 20s. I mean, it was a cold, cold day. And he had Walmart bags duct taped around his feet. He had no shoes, just Walmart bags and duct tape. And so we said, man, we got to get you some shoes. He said, that'd be great. And we asked him what size he was, and I think he was a size 11 or 13. He had some fairly big old hobbit feet on him. And so we drove to a Goodwill, and Ryan Engler went inside, and we searched for shoes, and we found some Nike high tops. And I confess they were ugly. They were purple with like a brown leather strap over the top. Ugly shoes, I confess, but warm shoes, right? And we also found some boots that I thought were pretty great. And so we took both of them, we drove back, and this required a drive across town and a drive back, and we got to the guy, and he said, are those Vans? And I said, no. He said, I can't wear those. And he would have rather worn Walmart bags duct taped to his feet than wear something ugly. And I get it, and I understand that people on the streets are people just like you and I, and it's understandable if you don't want another hot dog. But we also have to confront that sometimes there's just some dishonesty or some wackadoo thinking that we have to confront. But there's this other parable Jesus tells. It's called the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in the Good Samaritan, a guy has been beaten up and dragged down, and thieves besat him, I think is the right word, and knocked him down and left him in a ditch to die. And what happens when people come by and see him? Anybody? They keep on going. The first person is a religious person, and he's got a Bible study to get to. And the next person is of a different political persuasion or racial persuasion, and the Samaritan says, I ain't touching that filth, and because he's holy and clean. And people keep coming by. And what we can often miss when it comes to, so then the Good Samaritan comes by, and they were enemies, the Samaritan and the Jew. But the Samaritan, his enemy, is the one who takes him up and cleans him and puts him on his donkey and takes him to an inn and says, I'll pay whatever it takes to restore this man to health. Take good care of him, right? And we read that as the kind of person that we're supposed to be, but what we often miss or what we often skip over is that this is also a parable about excuses. It's a parable about how, as human beings, we tend to justify our lack of compassion or our lack of apathy, our lack of help, our lack of action. And so when we make a list of why we don't, I think it's important that we confront those don'ts, that we don't just say, well, that's why we don't, and leave it there, but instead we say, so I have a lack of love, or I'm not an advocate of the kenotic passage in Philippians 2, for example. We say something's missing. So we start to confront those things, and we start working on them so that we can do the stuff. It's a parable about excuses. So what I mean by this is that sometimes people just need a high five in the face, and sometimes that is me, which is a very funny picture, and I'm not going to do in front of you. But sometimes we need a kick in the pants. And Jesus kind of does that in in this Sermon on the Mount. He says, when you fast. Well, hold on a second. Do I? When you pray, are you a person of prayer? When you give to the needy. You see what he's doing? He's assuming that you can get past all the excuses. He doesn't talk about the excuses at all. He doesn't mince words. He just implies this is how it's going to be in the Sermon on the Mount, the mother of all sermons. So how do we confront a lack of love or apathy, fear of enabling, love of comfort, feeling overwhelmed? Lack of love, how do we confront that? Any thoughts? Practice? What does that mean? Yeah, in some sense, there's a fake it till you make it type mentality when it comes to love, because as our church, one of our church mantras is that love always serves. And so sometimes you do the action, and it's a snowball effect. You do the action, and that generates love in your life, and as you generate love in your life, the action comes. What else can we do to have more love in our life, for example? Pray. Can't we just, Jesus says in James, you have not because you ask not. Can't we say, God, fill me with love. Help me to be a loving person. Not just to do the loving stuff, but help me to genuinely have heartfelt, sincere love in my life. And doesn't that sound like the kind of prayer that God would honor? What's that? Yep, there's a lot in the great commandment of loving others as you love yourself about loving yourself as well. And so, even if we just confronted this lack of love in our life or apathy, how can you confront apathy? Well, can you surround yourself with people that are not apathetic? Doesn't that help? Can you spur yourself onto action, encourage yourself? Can you listen to sermons like this one and say, I've been slacking here? Apathy can be confronted, and so if one of the targets is just to confront your lack of or your apathy, that's a positive thing. That's a good direction to move in. Fear of enabling, I'll tell you, you spend enough time with people that are suffering, and you'll find out real quick that there are people who are legitimately suffering. And so it's finding those people. It's doing the work. It's doing the grind. The love of comfort, fasting that Jesus describes in just a moment is one way of confronting that. There's lots of ways you can confront your love of comfort. And we'll talk about some of that in just a moment. Feeling overwhelmed. The feeling overwhelmed part is just realizing that it's okay that you can't do it all. It's the old starfish on the beach thing. It helped that one. You were not designed to change everything everywhere, but you were designed to change some stuff somewhere. And it's coming to grips with that it's okay to be that and stepping into that and doing it. And so when we talk about giving to the needy, partially we're talking about finances, we're talking about money, and partially we're talking about resources and energy and manpower and woman power. We're talking about expenditures of resource. And I get pretty antsy when we talk about this as a church, because I think about what kind of church do we want to be, and the truth is, if you go around the room right now, there's various views on the nature of the atonement or the importance of the sacraments, baptism, communion. There's a lot of diversity when it comes to sexuality. There's a lot of diversity when it comes to scriptural interpretation and inspiration and exactly how that process works. And there's a lot of people that are like, well, I haven't thought about that at all. There's some who have given great thought to it and some who haven't. And I'm pretty comfortable with that as a pastor. This is an area that I'm not comfortable with a whole lot of diversity. The church should serve. The church should recognize the needy. The church should, and this is humanitarian in that our Buddhist neighbors or our Muslim neighbors or our atheist neighbors, this is an area that we can all come together and say those who are hurting should be helped. Now, how that works, the pragmatic part of that on who you give money to, who you give resources to, there'd be a whole lot of disagreement. But the heart and motive behind people are suffering, we should work to alleviate suffering, is something, Jesus was on to something here. And it was a message for all people at all times and all places. And so when I think about what kind of church we want to be, that's where I land and plant a flag. There's lots of flags I'm unwilling to plant, but this is one I'm willing to plant, that love always serves. That if we're going to be followers of Jesus, we're going to be embracers of love. And if we're going to be embracers of love, it means we're finding practical needs and we're trying to meet them. So how do you step up? Now, getting into the resources and the money part is always uncomfortable for me, so I always tackle it one way. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm thinking about my future, and I'm thinking about marrying if a lady comes to me and says, I'm thinking about marrying this dude, what's your advice? Because he's got this trait and this trait and this trait, and not so much this trait and this trait. Sometimes I feel unqualified to answer questions like that, and so I always go back to, what if it was my daughter asking me this question? And so when it comes to money and the difficult stuff to talk about in church, or sexuality, or scriptural interpretation, or whatever the stuff is that somebody wants my honest opinion on, so I'm not planting a flag saying everybody has to embrace this, everybody has to believe this, but if they want to know what I think and what the conclusions that I've come to, I often go to that question is, what would I tell my kids? What would I tell my sons? What would I tell my daughter? How would I communicate with my wife on these topics? And that allows me to be honest and straightforward without embracing or without planting a flag that you have to believe. And so when it comes to money, here's what I'm going to tell my kids. When it comes to their resources and it comes to their man and woman power, I'm going to tell them first, find a church you trust. There's lots of great churches out there. Daylight may not be the church that you trust. It may not be a church you want to invest in, and that's totally fine. But I encourage you to find a church you trust. And the scriptures seem to indicate that the tithe, the 10% of your income, is how the local church is supported. I'm fairly on board with the principle of the tithe. I'm not on board at all with the law of the tithe. And if you ever want to talk about that, I'll sit down and I'll share with you what I would share with my kids. And it's not the important part today. What I'm starting to say is that first off, you find a church that believes this stuff. First off, you find a church that encourages this stuff, that will confront you in your apathy, will confront you in your love of comfort, will confront you in your love of self, and will give you opportunities to attack those things and invest there. And that's all I really want to say about that, because that's not the purpose of this sermon, and I'm so acutely aware of the amount of abuse that's gone on as far as finances in the church that it's a topic for an entire different sermon, an entire different day. But I'm going to tell my kids that's where you start. That's how I advise my kids. It may not be where you start. You may not even be buying what I'm selling, but that's what I'm going to tell my kids. But then secondly, I'm going to tell them the principle that we talked about briefly already, is that you can't help everyone, but you can and should help some. That you are a human being that has the power and the amazing responsibility of serving others. So start by getting out of the house. I tried an experiment one time where I started taking the bus instead of driving my car, because that allowed me to interact with people. And the very first time I did it, I got caught in a pouring rainstorm and had to have my wife come and get me at Lowe's, because I had tiki torches I had bought at Lowe's that I was planning on bringing back to the bus. Story for another day. It ended in a disaster. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, is do something different from your norm. If when we talk about that list of stuff that holds you back, you say, well, that kind of describes me. I pretty much live in comfort, and I don't tend to notice those that are suffering around me. Go somewhere else and look around. Drive downtown and watch. Go to Kentucky Refugee Ministry and say, here I am. I have no idea what I'm doing here. I have no idea how I can help. I have no idea what you guys need, but I'm not on my couch eating nachos and binging Netflix today. Instead, I'm here. So I'm going to advise my kids to get out of the house, to show up. I'm also going to encourage them to carry love sacks or offer food. So when it comes to, and some of this is puddle and mud stuff, but when it comes to people flying signs or what most would describe as homeless people who have needs and say, I will work for food, just carry a bag in your car filled with pretzels and lunch, a fresh Lunchable for that day, some soda pop. Just have a gift bag, clean gloves, clean hats, clean socks, clean underwear. This is the kind of stuff that you can preempt. And so you're not being apathetic anymore, but you're preparing. And when the moment comes, it doesn't mean you hand cash out the window. I personally never hand cash to a stranger. And I'll tell them that. I will not give you cash. But there's Taco Bell. Let's go get your belly full. I will not give you cash, but I can see that your tent is a mess. Let's drive over to Dick's Sporting Goods and let's buy you a new tent. And so it's being mentally and factually prepared for the moment when someone's in need. And that requires getting out of yourself, getting out of your apathy, and I'm going to encourage my kids in that area. I'm also going to encourage them to find charities and support charities and give of their money and time. Anytime you say give of your money and time, immediately we compile that list of excuses. We add to that list of the why nots. Well, I don't have a lot of money. My bills are questionable every month anyway. And I certainly don't have time between my kids' soccer camp and my tennis matches and meeting with my friends to play bridge or whatever it is. And some stuff's good and some stuff's not. But we think, well, how can I give my time and resources when I don't have, or time and money when I don't have money and I don't have time? And the reality is, you do have those things when we go back to the Good Samaritan, which was a parable about excuses. And so we have to confront the legitimacy of our schedules. We have to confront the legitimacy of our usage of resources. And this is the kind of stuff that I want to say it this way, but I don't exactly believe it this way, so bear with me. On Judgment Day, I didn't have time and I didn't have money will not cut it. Period. This is something that Jesus seems to indicate would be naturally attacked in your own life. That if it won't cut it on that day, it shouldn't cut it in your own life now. It doesn't. And again, I'm not saying you can do everything. I'm saying you can do something. So when we talk about our time and our money, I'm not saying you have to give all your time to a soup kitchen or all your money to a charitable organization, but I am saying you should be giving some of your time to a soup kitchen and some of your time to a charitable organization and some of your money to organizations that are doing humanitarian efforts. It's not all, it's some. And when you make that differentiation between all and some, then all of a sudden you can. It's just a matter of sacrifice. It's a matter of attacking apathy, a matter of being filled with love. This is the sermon I'm preaching to my kids. So I want to give you a quick list of some of the ministries that we support here in Louisville. Our church gives away 15 to 20% of all income that comes in somewhere to humanitarian efforts and to global outreach efforts. One of them is KRM, which is Kentucky Refugee Ministry. We've adopted a refugee from Afghanistan that moved here recently and made a huge difference in their life. And so basically, when I say find a charity and show up, I'm giving you a list of areas that might interest you, and you can give them a call and show up, or you can get on their website and click the donation button. And here's another excuse we say, well, I don't want to just give money. Sure you do. That's just an excuse. Money is powerful when it comes to these organizations. They need money. A refugee that comes from Afghanistan needs an apartment. And in order to have an apartment, they need money. So just clicking the donate. If all you did your whole life was make a lot of money and give a whole lot of money to charity, in my opinion, that would be a life well spent. You never have to cross the threshold of their ministry, but you hit that donate button enough, it's going to make a big difference. I think you should do both, but don't fall for the trap of I don't just want to give money. Money is powerful. There's Convoy of Hope, and Convoy of Hope is an organization that shows up for disaster relief. So like when the tornadoes tore through Kentucky recently, Convoy of Hope is the ones filling semis full of resources and showing up with teams of skilled workers and rebuilding houses and repaving roads. Convoy of Hope is an awesome organization that you can get involved with. It's a national organization, but they do local stuff. The West Louisville Performing Arts Academy is an organization that we've had in here multiple times throughout our years as Daylight Church. It's an organization that takes people from the west side of Louisville, which is a more impoverished area of our city. You guys are probably familiar with the I-65 divide. The east side is affluent, the west side is not quite so affluent. And they are in the not so affluent area of the city. And they take kids and they teach them music and put them in a choir, and they've traveled to England and played for played for royalty, and they have an agreement with University of Louisville that kids that complete their program get full ride scholarships to go to U of L. So these are kids that normally would never travel the world, would never have such a sense of community, and maybe could never attend college. And this organization is doing all of those things. It's a stellar organization that you can serve. Dare to Care is a food ministry here in town that we show up every now and then and stuff bags, and they have need constantly. You give them a call, say, hey, I want to help. They're going to put you to work. If you call them and say, hey, I've got some money, they're going to use your money and use it well. And you'll notice this is a fairly long list. Adult and Teen Challenge, this is for people in addiction recovery. And so Chad's Hope and Priscilla's Place are two organizations here in Kentucky that house people who are in transition from recovery. So they've usually detoxed, and then they move into these situations, and then they help them move from point A to point B, not only just getting out of addiction, but also learning life skills and escaping the addictive life, experiencing freedom financially, experiencing freedom socially and spiritually. Amazing organization. Here in town is WaterStep, and WaterStep is on a mission to make sure that everybody in the entire planet has potable, clean water. And it's incredible what has been accomplished over the last 20 years when it comes to alleviating poverty and especially clean water in the world. The numbers are just stellar. But everyone in the world having clean water is within reach. It's very, very much easily in reach if people will just get off their couches. If people will stop spending money on stupid stuff, every human being could have access to clean water. Site 61 is an organization we serve every year and believe in. It's in the Portland area here in town. They minister to people who, we serve them Thanksgiving meals every fall, and they probably would not get a Thanksgiving meal otherwise. And Site 61 meets every Monday to pack big boxes of groceries that have been donated from all over Louisville. So there's this supply chain that gets all this stuff there, and then they pack the boxes and they give them to people who could use them. And so easy place to show up and make a difference. And I'm going to close with this idea. So these are all organizations that I encourage you, give them a call. It doesn't have to be something the church does. It can be Dennis Baumgarten saying, hey, the drinking water thing sounds great. I'm going to send an email to WaterStep and say, how can I help? And I'm telling you, WaterStep is going to respond and going to come up with some ways that Dennis can help. And I want to close with this one idea that I'm always going to share with my kids, and that's when you get a windfall, give a windfall. So you may live paycheck to paycheck. Your finances may be challenging, or you may struggle to make ends meet. But probably every now and then some unexpected or uncommon income will come in. And it may be, so I'm just going to share openly and understand my discomfort sharing this, but my wife and I just received part of an inheritance from the death of her father and her grandmother last year. That's a windfall moment. That's a moment where it's not our standard income, it's not our normal income, it's not the income that we budget for, it's not the income we're prepared for, but it's extra. And extra could be you may be a pizza server like Sydney, and you may get a $100 tip. That's a windfall moment for a pizza server. And what I would encourage my kids to do, and what I encourage you to do, and what I try to practice in my own life is every windfall moment I try to do something fairly excessive. This is money I didn't count on. It's money that I didn't need per se. It's like extra icing on the top of my normal financial picture. When you get that money, think of that as a moment where, man, give the whole thing away. Give a large percentage of it away. Give a big chunk. And so every time you get a windfall, think, this is a moment where I can give. This is a moment where I can be generous. This is a moment where I can serve. And I also want to point out that as an American living in Louisville, Kentucky, you've had windfalls your whole life. If you read the preface to Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger, you'll find out real quick that you are the purple garmented rich man that drives past the suffering all day, every day. And I don't mean that to say, thus you must give to be a good Christian. What I mean is, as a follower of Christ, that ought to register. There ought to be something in you that says, I need this to affect me. And I just want to encourage you today. I think that's what Jesus is saying on the Sermon on the Mount, is when you give, don't sound the trumpets. let everybody know, hey, everybody, look at what I'm dropping into the offering. I've been serving Water Step with $10,000 a year every year for the last 5 years, and I want you all to know about it because I want you to know how righteous I am. Jesus is confronting that, but he's also confronting whether you did or didn't. And as followers of Jesus, as people of God, we need to be people who allow love to serve through us. We need to allow it to impact not just our hearts and our motives, but our actions. We need to do something.